The wind that rolled through Whispering Pines Valley carried the scent of pine resin, wet soil, and history. The kind of place where silence wasn't empty, it was alive. It whispered through the trees, brushed the surface of the lake, and curled around the wooden posts of the old cabins that dotted the land like ghosts of a simpler time. Ethan Walker stood on the porch of a weathered cabin that had been abandoned for over a decade. His hands were calloused, his shirt damp with sweat, but his eyes, steady and thoughtful, watched the horizon like a man who finally belonged somewhere again. He had returned home after 15 years of city life. 15 years of boardrooms, concrete, and the endless hum of traffic. Now the only sound he wanted was the low crackle of a campfire and the cry of an eagle, circling above the valley his grandfather had once called the soul of Montana. The cabin sat on a gentle rise overlooking the valley basin. Below him, a small cluster of modern houses gleamed, neatly trimmed lawns, vinyl fences, and identical mailboxes painted in corporate beige. The freshly paved road wound like a scar through the green. It was Pine Ridge Estates, the HOA neighborhood that had arrived after his grandfather's passing. They'd built on leased land. They thought it was theirs. Ethan knew better. The land beneath them, every tree, every stream, belonged to the Walker family. And now it belonged to him. He didn't come back for money or control. He came back for peace. But peace, as he'd soon learn, wasn't what the HOA wanted. It started on a Tuesday morning. The kind of crisp, gold-tinted day where the sun made everything look clean and new. Ethan was hammering the final board into his porch railing when a white SUV rolled up the dirt road. On the side of the vehicle, the bold blue letters read, HOA Stories. The door opened and a woman stepped out. Blonde, immaculately dressed, with a tight smile that looked like it had been rehearsed in a mirror. She clutched a leather folder to her chest like it was a weapon. Karen Holt, president of the Pine Ridge HOA, even from a distance. Her perfume cut through the air like a declaration of territory. She didn't bother with a greeting. "Excuse me," she called, voice sharp and commanding. "You can't just build here without authorization." Ethan straightened up, resting the hammer on his belt. He gave her a polite nod. "Morning. I'm just fixing up my family's old cabin." Karen squinted, scanning the property like a hawk. "There's no record of this lot being part of the community's approved builds." "I'll need to see your permits." Ethan's tone stayed calm. "Don't think I need HOA approval for repairs. This isn't inside your community's boundary." Karen let out a clipped laugh, the kind that wasn't meant to be friendly. "Everything within Pine Ridge Valley falls under our jurisdiction. That includes this cabin. If you don't comply, we'll issue a notice of violation." He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Do what you need to do," and went back to work. Her mouth opened to protest, but the sound of the hammer drowned her out. The rhythmic pounding echoed across the valley, punctuating her frustration with every hit. Karen stormed off, muttering something about standards and law enforcement. Ethan just smiled faintly. He knew this wouldn't be the last visit. Over the next week, things escalated. Karen returned with 2 HOA board members, clipboards in hand, snapping photos of his tools, his solar panels, even the color of his cabin walls. They warned him about unauthorized structures, community harmony, and visual pollution. Ethan listened quietly every time, offering them water, answering politely, never once showing irritation. Behind the calm, though, he was watching how far they'd go before realizing they were picking a fight with the wrong man. He knew the deed that sat in his safe deposit box in town. It bore his grandfather's name, dated 78 years back, signed by the county registrar. The document stated in plain legal language that the Walker family owned all land east of Miller Creek, including the entirety of Pine Ridge Valley. The HOA's existence was based on a technical lease, one that had quietly expired 6 months ago, but Ethan wasn't in a hurry to reveal that. On the 5th day, Karen arrived again, this time angrier, louder, and accompanied by 2 men in uniform. The sheriff's deputies stepped out of their cruiser with polite caution. Their eyes met Ethan's, and one of them, Deputy Tom Miller, hesitated. He knew Ethan. They'd gone to high school together. Karen, however, charged ahead like she was leading a legal crusade. "This man is trespassing," she announced, voice full of false authority. He's constructing an illegal cabin on HOA property. He's refused to comply with our community rules, and he's in violation of— Tom raised a hand gently. Ma'am, let's just talk first. Karen folded her arms. There's nothing to discuss. I want him removed. Ethan finally stepped forward. Calm measured. Morning, Tom. Cabin looks a little better than when we were kids, doesn't it? Tom's brow furrowed. Ethan Walker? I'll be damned. Haven't seen you in years. Karen blinked, caught off guard. You know him? Tom nodded. Walker family's been here longer than anyone. His granddad used to own— Karen interrupted. Used to. This is HOA land now. Ethan simply smiled. You might want to double-check that. Tom sighed, scratching his chin. Karen, maybe let's slow this down. He's not exactly a stranger around here. But Karen wasn't the type to slow down. Her voice grew sharper. Deputy, I expect you to enforce the law. He's breaking it right now. Tom exchanged a look with his partner, then turned to Ethan. You got paperwork for the property? Ethan nodded. Sure do. Not here, but at the bank in town. Been in my family since the 1940s. Karen scoffed. Fabricated, I'm sure. I've already filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board. Ethan just shrugged. Then I guess we'll let the county sort it out. He walked back toward his porch, leaving the three of them standing in the dust. The hammering resumed. Bang, bang, bang! Each strike sounded like a countdown. That night, Karen held an emergency HOA meeting. Under the soft glow of fluorescent lights, she stood at the head of a long table, waving photos of Ethan's cabin like evidence in a courtroom. He's defying our rules, she said. He's building a structure that doesn't meet our community code. If we let this slide, others will follow. The board murmured agreement. They all saw the same thing, someone challenging the small empire they'd built. One member, a nervous man named Dale, raised his hand. Karen, maybe we should just check the property lines. If it's not technically ours— Karen cut him off sharply. Of course it's ours. The HOA covers the entire valley. I've looked at the maps. But she hadn't looked close enough. The valley's ownership records were complex, old, layered with trusts and leases that most people didn't even understand. Karen assumed that because her HOA plowed the road, they owned it. Assumption was her favorite weapon. 2 mornings later, Ethan found a bright yellow notice nailed to a tree near his cabin gate. Stop work immediately. HO order. He pulled it down, folded it, and tucked it in his jacket pocket. Then he went back to work. Later that day, the same white SUV pulled up again. This time, Karen had backup, 2 board members filming with their phones. She stormed up the path, heels digging into the dirt. You are now in violation of HOA cease and desist orders, she snapped. You are prohibited from further construction. Ethan didn't even look up. Karen, this isn't HOA land. Her tone sharpened. You don't decide that. Ethan set his hammer down, turned, and finally met her eyes. His calmness wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. No, I don't. The law does. And the law's been on my family's side for generations. For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling the tall grass. Then Karen pulled out her phone and started dialing. Fine, she said coldly. Let's see what the sheriff thinks this time. Ethan watched her, quiet. The valley stretched out behind him, miles of green rolling toward the horizon, dotted with cabins that all stood unknowingly on his land. He wasn't angry. He almost pitied her. She had no idea what storm she'd just called down on herself. By the time the deputies arrived again, the afternoon light had turned golden. Birds circled lazily in the sky. The air smelled of sawdust and sagebrush. Karen was already shouting before they even parked. Officer! He's still building! He's ignoring legal orders. Tom stepped out of the cruiser, looking weary. Karen, we've been over this. He's not doing anything criminal. She gestured wildly. Then you'll arrest him for trespassing? Tom frowned. On his own land? Karen froze. It's our land. Ethan leaned against the fence, arms folded. You sure about that? She turned toward him, pointing a trembling finger. You think you can just ignore community authority? Ethan's voice dropped, calm and measured. You think your authority reaches past your own property lines. The deputies exchanged glances. Something in Ethan's tone carried weight, like a man who wasn't bluffing. Karen's frustration boiled over. I don't care who you think you are. I'll have you in court before the week's over. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. That's probably a good idea. That evening, as the last light faded, Ethan sat on the porch, reading one of his grandmother's old letters. The paper was yellowed, the ink faint but legible. Ethan, it read, the valley doesn't just belong to us. It's part of who we are. Let others fight over rules and fences. We protect what's real. He folded the letter gently, a faint smile touching his lips. He wasn't looking for a fight. But if one was coming, he'd end it the right way, quietly, thoroughly, and legally. The wind moved softly through the valley, as if carrying his grandmother's voice. Down below, the HOA lights glimmered like small fires in the dark. Arrogant. Misplaced, temporary. Ethan knew their empire stood on borrowed ground. And soon, the ground itself would remind them who it truly belonged to. Morning came quiet and cold. The sun rose over the ridges like fire spilling through mist. Dew hung from the fence posts around Ethan's cabin, glittering like glass. The valley looked peaceful, but under that calm, something was shifting. Karen Holt woke up early too, though not for the sunrise. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping black coffee and flipping through a stack of papers. Her face was tight, tired, determined. She had filed every complaint, sent every notice, called every department she could find. The county clerk hadn't returned her calls. The zoning office had put her on hold. But today, she told herself, would be different. She had a meeting scheduled with the county records office. She'd bring every document, every photo, every complaint. She'd prove that Ethan Walker was in violation of Pine Ridge, HOA code, and she'd finally make him pay. She didn't know it yet, but this trip would change everything. By mid-morning, Ethan was down by the creek, setting new posts for his small dock. The sound of water moving over stone was steady, grounding. It was a good distraction from the noise he knew was coming. He'd received a formal notice himself, an HOA hearing invitation taped to his gate overnight. He'd smiled when he saw it. The HOA had no authority over his land, but he appreciated the effort. A few miles down the road, the white HOA SUV sped toward the county seat. Karen's hands gripped the wheel tighter than she realized. She rehearsed her argument out loud. Trespassing, unauthorized construction, zoning violation. Each phrase made her feel powerful again. Inside the county office, she met an older man in suspenders behind the desk. James Tucker, county land registrar for over 30 years. He knew the valley's history better than anyone. Karen laid out her folders like ammunition. This man has built on our property, she began. He refuses to acknowledge HOA authority. I need a property enforcement order. Tucker adjusted his glasses, glanced at her stack, and said in his calm drawl, Name? Ethan Walker. That name made him pause. He leaned back slowly, studying her. Walker, you say? As in Walker Valley? Karen frowned. Whispering Pines Valley, yes, but that name hasn't been used in decades. The man gave a faint smile. Maybe not by you folks, but on paper. It still is. He opened an old drawer and pulled out a thick, dust-covered ledger. Inside were yellowing pages marked with faded ink. Let's see here. Walker Estate, filed 1947. Deed renewal in 1973, amended 1998. He flipped a few pages, then looked up at her. Ma'am, this property, this entire valley, actually, still belongs to the Walker family. Karen blinked. Excuse me? He tapped the page. It's all right here. The HOA doesn't own any of it outright. You've got a lease agreement. 99 years. Signed by the late Arthur Walker, Ethan's grandfather. It expired in January. Her throat went dry. That's impossible. We have deeds. He nodded slowly. You have leases, Mrs. Holt. That's not the same thing. She tried to form words, but nothing came. The weight of what he was saying hit her like a slow-moving avalanche. Then, technically, she whispered, all of Pine Ridge. He nodded again. Legally, it all sits on Walker land. For the first time in years, Karen Holt didn't have a single thing to say. By the time she returned to the valley, Ethan was standing near his fence, speaking quietly with Deputy Tom Miller. Tom held a folder in his hand, one that Ethan had dropped off earlier that morning. Karen pulled up fast, her SUV skidding slightly in the gravel. She stepped out, red-faced and furious, holding her own stack of papers that suddenly felt like confetti. You knew, she hissed. You knew all along. Ethan nodded once, calm as always. I did. Tom cleared his throat, trying to diffuse the tension. Karen, I've seen the documents myself. County confirmed it. Ethan's the rightful owner of the entire valley. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction here anymore. Not on his property. Not even on yours. Her jaw tightened. You mean... Tom nodded. Lease expired. Every inch of Pine Ridge Estates is technically his land. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind moving through the pines. Karen's confidence cracked. That can't be right. We've built homes, roads, a clubhouse. Ethan spoke softly, almost kindly. All on leased soil. My grandfather allowed it. He believed in community. He trusted people would respect the valley. She shook her head, stepping closer. And what do you plan to do now? Kick us out? Tear it all down? Ethan looked past her, out toward the houses gleaming in the sunlight. No, you've all built lives here. I'm not cruel. Her voice wavered, half defiant, half pleading. Then what? He looked back at her. But there are conditions now. No more HOA expansion. No more harassment of neighbors who live beyond your imaginary lines. And from now on, the valley becomes a conservancy, protected, untouchable. Karen stared at him, her face pale. You can't just decide that? He smiled faintly. Actually, I can. It's my land. The news spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire. By evening, every porch light was on, every phone buzzing with rumors. Some thought Ethan was bluffing. Others had already checked the county records themselves and found the truth staring back at them. The HOA board called an emergency meeting in the clubhouse. The mood was tense, the air heavy with panic. Karen sat at the head of the table, her usual poise gone. We'll appeal, she said weakly. We'll challenge the deed. But Dale, the same nervous board member who'd warned her weeks ago, slid a printed document across the table. There's nothing to challenge. The lease has expired. We don't even own the land under this building. Someone muttered, he could charge us rent. Another voice said, or evict us. Karen slammed her hand on the table. He won't. He can't. But her voice didn't sound convincing anymore, not even to herself. Meanwhile, Ethan was at his cabin, the firelight flickering across the wood-paneled walls. On the table before him lay the original deed, the family seal pressed into the corner like a quiet reminder of legacy. He wasn't angry at Karen. If anything, he pitied her. People like her didn't know how to exist without control. He'd spent days thinking about what to do next. He didn't want revenge. He wanted balance, the kind his grandfather always talked about. He picked up his grandmother's last letter again. The edges were frayed now, but the words still glowed with warmth. Forgive, but do not forget who you are. The land remembers those who treat it kindly. Ethan folded the letter gently, then made a decision. Tomorrow he'd call a meeting. The next day, the valley gathered outside his cabin. Dozens of residents, young families, retirees, curious onlookers, all came. Even Karen was there, standing off to the side, arms crossed but silent. Ethan stepped up onto his porch, addressing them calmly. The morning sun cut through the valley behind him, turning the trees into pillars of gold. I know there's been confusion, he began. Some of you feel angry, betrayed. I understand that. But none of this was my doing. The land my family owned was leased, not sold. The documents are public record. I didn't come back to take anything from you. He paused, looking across the crowd. Faces softened. The tension thinned. I came back to restore the land, to protect it. My grandparents built this cabin as part of that dream. Somewhere along the way, paperwork and pride got in the way of what mattered. Community. Karen's eyes flickered, guilt flashing through them. Ethan continued, I'm not evicting anyone. You'll stay, your homes will stay, but the HOA will no longer control this valley. I'll be establishing the Walker Conservancy, a private trust that will preserve this land for generations. No more unnecessary rules, no more fines, no more harassment. Someone asked from the crowd, and what about her? All eyes turned toward Karen. Ethan looked at her quietly. Mrs. Holt will remain a resident like anyone else. I don't hold grudges. Karen looked down, her voice barely audible. Why are you being kind after what I did? Ethan smiled softly. Because you taught me something important. That power means nothing if it isn't used to protect, not control. The crowd was silent for a moment, then began to applaud. Not loudly, but sincerely. Weeks passed. The HOA story's decals disappeared from the white SUVs. The office building that once held Karen's little empire was turned into a nature center for the Conservancy. Trails were restored, the lake cleaned, and the valley's wildlife began to return. Karen stayed in her home, quieter now. Her days spent tending her garden instead of writing violations. She never apologized outright, but she didn't need to. Her silence was apology enough. Tom Miller often stopped by Ethan's cabin, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just sitting in peace. "You handled that better than most would have," he'd say. Ethan would smile. "My grandfather always said, you don't win by fighting people. You win by letting the truth do the work." And it had. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Ethan walked down the valley road. The cabins below glowed warm in the fading light. The same place that once bristled with conflict now felt like home again. He paused near the old Pine Ridge gate, the one that once bore the HOA's proud logo. The sign was gone now, replaced with a new one. Walker Valley Conservancy, protected land since 1947. He smiled, hands in his pockets, breathing in the scent of pine and smoke. For the first time in years, the valley was quiet again, not the silence of tension, but of peace. He looked up toward the stars beginning to shimmer above the tree line. Somewhere he imagined his grandparents watching, proud. He whispered softly, "It's safe now."